You just spent 2 hours drilling holes. You finally found the deepest part of the lake on your fish finder, and you're convinced you've hit the jackpot, the winter bream mother lode. But let me ask you a question. Are you sure about that? Or are you just sitting on a cold, empty hole, wasting your day? Today, we're tearing down one of the biggest myths in winter fishing. The idea that the deepest spot is always the wintering hole for bream. I'm going to show you the subtle signs that separate a real bream condominium from a worthless underwater desert. And this might be the reason your winter trips have been so frustrating. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, have you ever spent a whole day on a perfect deep spot and caught absolutely nothing? Be honest. For generations, the logic seemed sound. Water is coldest at the surface, ice forms, and the fish must retreat to the deepest, most stable water to survive. The old-timers taught us to find the main basin, drill in the middle, and wait. It makes sense on the surface. It's a simple, easy-to-follow rule. And that's exactly why so many people get it wrong. This oversimplification has led to countless frustrating fishless days on the ice. Anglers become so focused on the single metric of depth that they completely ignore the three things a fish actually needs to survive the winter: stable oxygen, a reliable food source, and some form of structure for security. We're going to break that habit right now and start thinking like a fish, not just a guy with an auger. First, let's just get it out there. The great depth myth needs to die. The idea that bream simply drop into the deepest hole and sit there all winter is a massive oversimplification. Yes, they seek stable water temperatures, and deep water provides that. But a deep hole with no other redeeming qualities is just that, a hole. Think of it like a giant, empty room with no furniture, no food, and bad air. You wouldn't want to spend your winter there, and neither would a bream. They are looking for a home, not a prison. The most successful ice anglers know that depth is only one piece of a much larger puzzle. In many cases, it's not even the most important piece. So the next time you fire up your sonar, resist the urge to immediately race to the deepest number you see on the map. We need to look for more. Let's talk about the single most important factor: oxygen. It's the one thing fish absolutely cannot live without. Many deep, stagnant lake basins, especially those with soft, muddy bottoms, can suffer from oxygen depletion during the winter. As organic matter decomposes on the bottom, it consumes oxygen. With a thick layer of ice and snow blocking sunlight and preventing the wind from mixing the water, this oxygen doesn't get replenished. The deepest part of the lake can become an anoxic dead zone. The fish know this. You might mark a few desperate, lethargic fish down there, but they won't be feeding, they're just surviving. A slightly shallower area with a harder bottom or a hint of current will almost always have better oxygen levels, and therefore more life. Your sonar can't show you an oxygen meter, so you have to use your brain. Now for the second critical element, the food pantry. Bream have to eat, even in the winter. Their metabolism slows down, but it doesn't stop. They aren't going to set up camp in a place with a bare cupboard. What do they eat in winter? They graze on small invertebrates, crustaceans, and bloodworms that live in the bottom sediment. These food sources are not evenly distributed. They thrive in specific bottom compositions, often avoiding the soupy, anoxic mud found in the deepest basins. A sterile, deep mud flat is a food desert. The bream are looking for areas where silt transitions to sand or gravel, or where there's decaying vegetation from the summer. Finding the bream's food is how you find the bream. It's that simple. Depth is irrelevant if there's nothing on the menu. This brings us to the concept of structure over depth. This is a game changer. I would rather fish a 15-foot deep flat with a single submerged log on it than a featureless 30-foot deep basin every single time. Why? Because that log is structure. It provides a current break, a reference point, and a home for the very invertebrates the bream are eating. Bream are not open water fish by nature. They relate to edges and objects. This could be a sunken tree, a rock pile, a sharp ledge, or even a subtle change in the bottom hardness. These features concentrate fish, a deep, empty basin disperses them. When you're looking at your lake map, stop looking for the lowest point. Start looking for the squiggly lines, the sharp turns in the contour, and the notations for submerged timber. That's where the treasure is. For those of you fishing reservoirs, learning to read an old river channel is a superpower. But here again, anglers make a critical mistake. They find the channel and assume the fish must be in the deepest part of it, the bottom of the trough. More often than not, they are wrong. The most productive spots are not the straightaways or the bottom of the channel. They are the bends, the points, and the intersections where a smaller creek channel joins the main one. These inside and outside bends create subtle current changes and sediment deposits that concentrate both food and fish. Imagine tracing that old river with your finger on a map. The fish will be holding on the corners, not on the long, boring stretches in between. That's where they can rest, out of the main flow, but still dash out to grab a meal. Let's talk about a common trap, the first drop-off. You walk out from the shore, your flasher shows the bottom dropping from 10 feet to 20 feet, and you think, this is it. You're not alone. This is the most obvious piece of structure on any body of water, and it gets hammered with pressure from other anglers. While it can hold some fish, it's often populated by smaller, more aggressive fish or transient schools passing through. The bigger, wiser schools of bream are often further out, relating to more subtle secondary drop-offs or offshore structures. Don't just stop at the first easy-to-find spot. See it as a clue, a starting point. The real honey hole might be another 100 yards out, on a piece of structure that 90% of other anglers are too lazy to look for. Now for an invisible force that dictates everything: current. Even in lakes and reservoirs, there is almost always some form of subtle, wind-driven or spring-fed underwater current. It can be your best friend or your worst enemy. A slight current flowing into a deep hole can be a fantastic thing, bringing in fresh oxygen and nutrients, turning a dead zone into a hotspot. Conversely, a strong current at the bottom of a hole can make it a miserable place for a fish to hold, forcing them to expend too much energy. You can detect this by watching your lure on the sonar. If it's not hanging perfectly straight down, or if it sways, there's current. Learning to find areas with a soft current, where fish can rest but still have oxygen delivered, is a high-level skill that pays off. Your sonar is more than just a fish marking tool. You need to learn to read the signs of life on the bottom. What does a dead bottom look like? On a flasher, it's a thin, weak red line. On a graph, it's a smooth, uniform, thin line. A living bottom is different. It will appear thicker, maybe fuzzy, or show multiple colors, indicating a harder return or the presence of weeds, debris, or invertebrates. Sometimes you'll see clutter just off the bottom. This isn't noise, it's often tiny baitfish or insect life. I get more excited seeing a messy bottom with no fish marks than I do seeing a big red arch suspended over a clean, dead bottom. That messy bottom is the dinner table, and the dinner guests will arrive eventually. We also have to consider the barometer. Fish are incredibly sensitive to changes in atmospheric pressure. On a day with a stable or slowly falling barometer, bream might be more active and willing to move around to feed. But during a major cold front, when the pressure skyrockets, they can get lockjaw. They might still be packed into that deep hole, and you might see them on your sonar, but they will be completely inactive. They're just sitting there waiting for the pressure to ease up. So even if you find the perfect spot, the conditions might mean the fish are uncatchable. This isn't a failure in location, it's a lesson in timing. Sometimes the best move is to downsize your lure to the absolute smallest you can find and just try to trigger a reaction strike. A winter holding spot is not a jail cell. The fish are not locked in there 24/7. Time of day matters immensely. Bream often have specific low-light feeding windows, typically early in the morning and late in the afternoon, just before dark. A spot can seem completely devoid of life at noon, but as the sun gets low, schools of fish will move in from their deeper resting areas to feed on adjacent flats or structures. I've seen it 100 times. An angler fishes a spot for 6 hours, gives up, and leaves at 3 in the afternoon. Then another guy comes in, drills in the same holes, and catches a limit in 45 minutes. The first guy didn't fish a bad spot, he just left before the dinner bell rang. Patience and timing are key. Beware the illusion of the community hole. You drive onto the lake and see a village of 15 ice shanties clustered in one area. The immediate thought is they must be on the fish. But that's a dangerous assumption. Often this is just herd mentality. One guy found a deep hole on a map set up and a few others joined him, assuming he knew something. Then more people came because they saw a group. You could have a dozen anglers all sitting together, all freezing, and none of them catching a single fish. Never trust the crowd. Trust your own electronics and your own instincts. I often have my best days by going in the complete opposite direction of the main group, looking for those overlooked subtle spots that everyone else drove right over. Let's talk about the magic of subtle bumps and rises. On a large, deep, featureless flat, the bream won't be spread out randomly. They will be concentrated on any tiny irregularity. We're not talking about a huge underwater mountain. It could be a rise of just 2 or 3 feet, a small hump, a little ridge, or a slight depression. These tiny features are enough to create a small current break and attract bait. They are magnets for fish. This is where high-quality mapping or spending the time to drill a grid pattern and meticulously check your depth pays off. Finding a 2-foot rise on a 30-foot flat might feel like finding a needle in a haystack, but that's where you'll often find the entire haystack of fish. The transition line between a hard bottom and a soft bottom is a fish highway. Bream and other panfish love these edges. Why? Because the soft, mucky bottom is where the insects and larvae live, but the hard bottom of sand, gravel, or rock provides better cover and ambush points. They cruise these edges, moving from the safety of the hard bottom to the food-rich, soft bottom to feed. Your sonar can help you find this. A hard bottom gives a strong, thick, and often bright red return on a flasher. A soft bottom gives a weaker, thinner, or wider and less intense return. Finding the spot where that signal changes is often the key. If you can find a hard bottom point that extends out and drops into a soft bottom basin, you've found a spot worth fishing all day. Don't ever underestimate the influence of hidden water sources. An underwater spring or a small, unmarked inlet can be a game changer in the winter. These sources introduce water that is often slightly warmer and, more importantly, better oxygenated than the surrounding lake water. Even a tiny inflow can create a microhabitat that attracts an incredible amount of life. It can turn a completely average-looking bay or flat into the hottest spot on the lake. These are hard to find. Sometimes you'll see an area of weak ice or open water that's a dead giveaway. Other times you have to find them with a temperature sensor or by simply noticing a concentration of fish on your sonar in a place that otherwise makes no sense. When you find one, mark it on your GPS and never share it. Let's clarify what schooling really means on your sonar. Seeing a giant suspended ball of red marks in the middle of the water column might make your heart race, but it's often a bad sign. These are typically inactive, neutral fish. They are just resting, conserving energy. They are incredibly difficult to catch. What you want to see are fish that are relating to the bottom. You want to see marks that are right on the bottom, or just a foot or two above it. These are fish that are in a feeding or searching posture. A single, solid red mark glued to the bottom is a far more promising target than a Christmas tree of suspended marks 10 feet up. One is ready to eat, the others are taking a nap. Sometimes your best piece of electronics is the lure on the end of your line. Your sonar can tell you the depth and if there are fish, but your lure can tell you what the bottom is actually made of. Pay attention to how it feels when you tap the bottom. A tungsten jig makes a sharp tick, tick on a hard gravel or rock bottom. It makes a softer thud on sand or clay, and it makes a mushy poof as it sinks into soft mud. This physical feedback is invaluable. You can map out bottom composition just by feel. If you're marking fish but can't get bit, and your lure feels like it's sinking into muck, you're probably dealing with inactive fish in a low oxygen zone. If you feel that tick, tick, you're in the right zone. Here's a thought that goes against the grain. Don't always ignore the shallower water. I'm not talking about 5 feet, but it's all relative. If the main basin is 40 feet deep, the fish might not be sitting in 40 feet. They might be holding in 25 feet on the edge of the basin. And more importantly, the most active, feeding fish from that school might push up onto an adjacent flat that's only 15 or 20 feet deep to feed for an hour. This is especially true during periods of stable, sunny weather. While everyone else is huddled over the deepest water, the real action is happening on the front porch, the shallower feeding shelf nearby. Always check these adjacent areas. Remember that a wintering hole is not a permanent address. The best spots change as the winter progresses. A spot that was fantastic in early December, when there was plenty of oxygen and active life, might become a dead zone by late February. As winter wears on, oxygen gets depleted, food sources get consumed, and fish are forced to move. They might shift to a different part of the lake or relate to a different type of structure. You can't just rely on your spots from last year or even last month. You have to be willing to adapt and keep searching. Winter fishing is a process of elimination, and the puzzle changes from early to mid to late ice. Keep an open mind and don't get stuck in a rut. So let's put it all together into a mental checklist. Before you decide a spot is worth fishing for more than 5 minutes, ask yourself these questions. Am I just in a deep hole, or is there some other structure here? A point, a ledge, a turn in the channel. What does the bottom look like on my sonar? Is it hard, soft, or a transition between the two? Am I seeing any signs of life, like baitfish or clutter near the bottom? Is there a shallower feeding flat located nearby where active fish might move? Answering these questions forces you to think beyond just depth. It turns you from a passive driller into an active hunter. If the spot doesn't tick at least 2 or 3 of these boxes, it's probably not the honey hole. It's time to move on and keep searching. I'll give you a perfect case study. A few years ago, on a lake I know well, everyone always fished the 35-foot basin in the middle. I did too, with little success. One day, out of frustration, I studied the map and saw a tiny, insignificant-looking underwater point that topped out at 28 feet, right on the edge of that basin. It was a 7-foot rise, but it was a quarter-mile from the community hole. I went there and drilled. The bottom was solid rock, transitioning to mud. My flasher lit up with fish glued to the bottom. They weren't in the deepest hole. They were on the structure adjacent to the deepest hole, where the hard bottom held crayfish, and the oxygen was better. I caught my limit of huge bream while everyone else sat fishless in the perfect spot. That's the difference. So the takeaway is this: stop chasing depth for depth's sake. The deepest hole is a siren song, a trap for lazy anglers. The real winter bream hotspots are about the combination of factors: food, oxygen, structure, and safety. A fish will always choose a spot that has 3 of those things over a spot that only has 1. And the most shocking part? The absolute best wintering spots I've ever found were often 2 to 5 feet shallower than the deepest hole in the area. The fish weren't in the bowl, they were on the rim of the bowl where life was actually happening. This changes everything. It means you stop drilling in a straight line to the middle and start hunting for those subtle, overlooked features. You'll spend less time staring at a motionless spring bobber and more time actually fighting fish. Thank you for watching. If this just blew your mind a little bit, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that goes against the grain. Now, I want to know, what's the most overlooked feature you look for when hunting for winter bream? A subtle point? A hard bottom patch? Let's get a real discussion going in the comments.